So this morning we want to think a little bit about the idea of belonging, about belonging here specifically. And the sort of the impetus for this sermon comes out of three things. The first is that next Sunday we are inviting people into membership. People have requested to become members of this church, and we are welcoming them with open arms, which means hopefully by now they've felt like they belong here. So we want to rejoice with that. The second thing is that on Saturday, next Saturday, we're going to an I Belong event, which is to say that historically, people in Morgantown, West Virginia, have felt like they belong if they're sort of white and middle class and cisgender, and everyone else can sort of make do at best at the bottom of the pile somewhere. And so it takes deliberate effort for us in the community and us in the churches to say, no, it's not just those groups, although let's face it, we still look, sort of pretty white and middle class here, but not because we don't try. And the third thing is that it's Black History Month. And certainly, African Americans are one of the groups that have not traditionally felt like they belong in places like West Virginia, in places like America. They feel rather differently in Ghana. So it's part of this sense of how do we talk about belonging inside the church? To start, I just want you to take a minute to remember a time and a place where you felt like you didn't belong. You were somewhere and you just didn't belong. Remember the feeling. If you feel brave, share that feeling, that time, and that place with somebody close to you. Out loud.
That's a very good. Well, I was an undocumented worker in Switzerland when I was a kid, and so I ended up being there in a really bizarre way. And the family spoke French. My parents spoke a little bit of English, and the kids only spoke French. And I remember I was 17. I remember very, very vividly that I just did not. That everything was foreign and strange and uncomfortable, and I was undocumented, and so there was this bizarre threat that I might be sent home if I talked about it, but at the same time I felt very much not at home, so I couldn't decide whether I wanted to be there or not. It was very, very confusing, and I often felt extremely, extremely homesick, even though home was not necessarily a better place for me personally. But it was just a very uncomfortable feeling and a very lonely feeling. But it turned out to be one of the places where I ended up feeling the happiest and the most at home once I could figure out how to communicate.
So nice being able to communicate, isn't it?
It was. And it wasn't communicating in English or through words. I did lots of funny faces and lots of laughing. And that was enough to get me through that very difficult time. But it was challenging. I used to have to walk through the red light district to get to church on Sunday morning. And that's a very bizarre place to be, even on Sunday morning, because in Geneva, it was extremely active on Sunday morning. So, just a lot to think about. It was good and bad, uncomfortable and inspiring at the same time.
Anyone else want to share?
I spent the night on the street 3 times when I was in India. And the first night, There are a ridiculous amount of rats in India. I don't know if anybody's aware of this. It's an open sewer, so it's really an unpleasant experience. But there are people that live their entire lives on the street there, and that's also a public experience. I've never felt less welcome anywhere in my life.
So go ahead.
This isn't as dramatic as that. We got married and moved from Louisiana to Rhode Island, and it was just like going to another planet. Southerners talk to everybody, New Englanders talk to no one. And it was a culture, climate shock. And it's just really incredible. It was absolutely a beautiful state. Great schools, great hospitals, great everything. I just hated it. So, we moved eventually. It's good to be here.
So as we think about not belonging, obviously we need to think also about belonging. And for almost everybody here, there was a time when you came to church not belonging. I mean, I guess like Will and Tom don't have memories of coming first, but pretty much everybody else here came as somebody who remembers that. So there's this process. Oh, sorry, Axel's back there too, right? Sophia, do you remember the first time you came here? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so some of the kids said Dominic too. Yeah, thanks. Right? So this gives us hope. Right? This gives us hope that we can at any point move from not belonging to belonging. And so our scriptures this morning give us some clues for how that can happen, how that does happen. The Deuteronomy passage that we read was a bunch of laws and this decision that we're going to be people who follow God's way. It's important in Deuteronomy to remember this is a collective decision. It's not an individual decision. That's not the way laws work, right? You can't move to a country and say, I've decided not to bother following the laws here, right? Or when the city council passes an ordinance, we can't go, well, I don't feel like really feel like that one very much, I'll just ignore that one. I mean, we can do that, but there's consequences to doing that. Right? And so the people of Israel have to decide, as a people, are we going to follow these laws? And right, there needs to be some sort of enforcement mechanism, because not everybody is going to. Right? And so how are we going to do all of this? So it's a collective decision, but it's still to some extent an individual decision. Right? Every day, you get to decide whether you're going to drive speed limit or not. Right? Every day you get to decide how you treat the people around you and whether you're going to sort of randomly assault people as you walk down the street. I mean, you don't think about those decisions because those are decisions that have sort of been built into you, but you could randomly start hitting people, right? You could, yeah, I mean, the world is your, oyster, and you could end up, having horrible consequences, but you could do lots of stupid things with your life if that's what you wanted to. So there's this sort of, both a collective part of this decision of we are going to be a community of laws and of good laws, or, and there's the individual part, saying, yeah, I'm also part of this community, and these laws make sense to me as ways of, well, staying in a jail, if nothing else, but of creating a kind of society that I want to be part of. Which also gives us the opportunity for civil disobedience. Right? When we see laws, we go, no, these are not just laws. These are not good laws. We have the opportunity to not only say that, but do that. Say, no, I will not abide by these laws. If these laws are hurtful to other people, I'm not going to follow them. That's also part of that decision. Corinthians, in Paul's letter, 1 Corinthians is always good because it shows us how not to do things. And in 1 Corinthians, right, Paul is trying to get this sense of belonging into his churches, and he's noticing that it's not happening. That some of the people are following Apollos, and some of them are following Paul, and so the church is starting to splinter already because of the various teachers. And Paul says, no, you can't do that. Right? And so he employs all of these metaphors to explain to people that you can't do that because you're all one thing. And so he talks about the body of Christ. So the last verse that Ryan read says, we are God's servants, working together. And so that's one metaphor for how we understand ourselves, that we have a common master, we have a common identity as God's servants, and we have a common task. We are working together on this task that God has given us. Or he says also, you are God's field, or God's building, right? So all of these different metaphors, a way of understanding that we're all part of the same thing. That we don't, we can't like splinter because, how do you cut a building in half? We're all God's building. And of course, right, in our modern sense, right, in our modern churches, it's become really clear when some of us are Church of the Brethren folk, and some of us are Lutherans, and some of us are Episcopalians, and some of us are Catholics, and we all worship in our own little groups. But we also know, to some extent, that this isn't the way it's supposed to be. Ideally, a church is a church is a church. And that, we should be able to feel like we belong in any of them. In some ways, the Muslims have a much clearer understanding of this, not understanding, but practice of this, than Christians do. That in the Muslim world, you don't belong to a mosque. A mosque is just a place of worship, and any Muslim is free to walk into any mosque and pray. And you're no more at home in one than you are in any other. The idea is that, right, when it's time for prayer, you walk into the nearest one. It's not like you have to go back to your mosque. It's not supposed to be an idea in the Muslim world, although, there's always this reality versus ideal thing going on everywhere. The passage we read in Matthew is part of the Sermon on the Mount, which is the sort of the focus of what we're doing in Scriptures these days. And the Sermon on the Mount, right, this part of the Sermon on the Mount is really all about faithfulness, which is part of belonging. Because part of creating a sense of belonging is that we are responsible to each other. And so part of the way we're responsible to each other is that we are going to be faithful to what we have said we are going to do. Right? So we had a buckwheat supper last night, and some people signed up. And if nobody had bothered showing up, it wouldn't have worked very well. Right? That some people say, no, I'm going to show up, and I'm going to do my job, and and not everybody did. Right? Because sometimes we mess up, right? And sometimes we forget. So forgiveness is part of this, and recognizing there needs to be some flex in the system, that if somebody gets sick, they probably shouldn't show up. I don't want someone, coughing all over my buckwheat any more than you do. Right? But part of creating a sense of belonging is to say, yeah, I'm part of this group, and therefore my yes is going to be yes, and my no is going to be no, and I'm going to show up when I say I'm going to show up. Right? And I'm going to be the kind of person I promise to be. And we're going to do this all together, but we can only do this together if we are faithful to each other and to ourselves. And ultimately, this is part of being faithful to God. So this is also part of belonging. Part of people's commitment to belong here, or people's feeling of belonging here, is that they are going to be faithful to each other, to be faithful to themselves. When people think about membership in a group like the church, they also recognize that there's an exclusion part of this. That the moment you have membership, it means that there are people who aren't members. Right? And so there's things that members can do here that non-members can't. Not very many, right? But some, at least. Right? Or if if you're a member here, it means you're not a member there, or you're baptized, or you're not baptized. Or like in most churches, there's people who can take communion and those who can't take communion. We've eliminated that one, but there's always, right? There's always the other side to membership, and that's the excluded people. And in some ways, we try to minimize those, but in some ways, we want to recognize that this is also a reality here. That if somebody walks into this church and says, I want to come to this church, but I don't feel comfortable unless I bring my assault rifle with me. Because there are some people who don't feel comfortable in crowds without their gun. And I would say, well, you're welcome, your gun isn't. And we might be willing to help you get there, but until you get there, sorry, you're not welcome here. Or, somebody might come in and say, I want to be part of this church, I want to come and worship with you, but, we're going to make sure there's no black people here because we want a white-only church here. And at this point, they'd be fine. But it's not like that's a goal of ours. Right? And so we'd have to say to that person, no, this is not your group. If being a white-only group is important to you, we're a bit embarrassed about that, to be honest. And so, no, there is a point to saying inclusion and exclusion are sides of the, opposite sides of the same coin. And we are quite, right, I do not proclaim that everybody is welcome here. I would like people to become the kind of people who are welcome here, but that's a different thing. One of the central parts, of course, of any church, in the sense of belonging, is worship. And that's also very tricky because there's lots of people who don't feel comfortable in a worship service. Right? Church is sort of this habit that you get into, but it's not natural. I mean, you don't do this many other times during the week. Students do this all the time. Come in and sit down, someone talks, right? You ask a few questions, you go home. But those of us who've left our student days behind a while ago don't do this sort of thing very regularly. This is sort of the one time of the week when most of you do what you're doing now, especially in like rows and pews like this. And you don't gather to sing with other people very often. And so there's lots of reasons for people to come in here and feel uncomfortable, especially the first time. But again, so we try to make worship feel welcoming, but it's awkward. But again, the goal is always to make people feel welcome, that this can be a process. Not to create something that's instantly welcoming, but something that can become for them what they want or what they need. Important also to recognize that welcoming is work. It's an effort to make people feel welcome. And for the most part, we do that very well. People come here and they say, well, I felt so welcome when I came here. Lots of them don't come back, but they still tell me afterwards that they felt really welcome. Right? It's not a perfect system. If it was a perfect system, we'd be full. Right? But it's really good to be able to start with celebration. To be able to start with the fact that, yeah, we do that pretty well here. Even though it's, mostly empty. Right? We still do that pretty well. And then, when you start with a celebration, then you can say, okay, how do we do this better? Because if you start out with, you're really, really bad at this, and you start down here, and then, well, how do we do this better? Right? But if you start out pretty good, then you can go, okay, well, we're already pretty good. How do we improve? That should always be the goal. Right? It's not like we do this really well, we're just going to keep on going, but, okay, what's the next step up? And that's easier to start in a positive mode, in a positive vein, than to start with depression and kicking ourselves for, churches are really good at guilt. We're going to try not to be. So the goal, right? The goal is welcoming. The goal is belonging. And the goal is to be God's servants, working together. God's field, God's building. So our final song is one of these really good songs written by either Gerald Durstein or J.D. Martin, depending on how he wants to call himself that particular day. We're going to sing the refrain, and then the verse 1, and then verse 2, and then the refrain again. I invite you to stand. Let's sing the journey number 50.